Hi, this is a recording of a webinar that I gave on December 13th, 2018. I recorded it in a shortened version at the request of some people who were on it and wanted to share, and other people who just had to miss the webinar. I call it Problem Parents, Our Untapped Asset. That's a little provocative title, and I wanted you to think about it. The topic that we're going to be looking at is, why do we not have strong partnerships with families? What is it we can do about it? What are the underlying issues? Now, I'm going to be focusing mostly on the families of youth with disabilities in secondary school who are going through the transition process. But the principles that I'm going to be talking about can be generalized to any student, any age, whether they have a disability or not. It's just that families of kids with disabilities have another layer of issue that we need to address and help them work through. So I'm going to be I invite you as we go through this, I'm going to give you 3 opportunities where I'll pause briefly to have you write some thoughts, some reflection about what comes to your mind at certain points. So there are going to be 3 thought bubbles. As I said, we're going to be looking at why involve families, what are the ways to involve families, how should we do it, what are the issues. So let's begin with the legal background for why involve families. As you know, IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Improvement Act of 2004, had the same purpose that had been in previous special ed law, to ensure that all children with disabilities have available to them a free, appropriate public education that emphasizes special education and related services designed to meet their unique needs. There's a lot we could say about that part, but the part that is highlighted, prepare them for further education and employment and independent living. This is the purpose of the special ed law, to provide them the supports and services they need so that when they walk across that stage at graduation, they are ready. They have what it takes to be successful adults. There's some conversation and speculation that when the special ed law is reauthorized, they will change the term independent living to prepare them for adult responsibilities, since a lot of times people think of independent living as where they're going to reside. So we'll see what happens when the special ed law is reauthorized. Now, I'm pretty nerdy. And when the regulations for IDEA 2004 came out, I was in the middle of my dissertation, and I decided that I would print out the whole packet of papers of the regulations, and I went through with a highlighter and I highlighted every time I saw the word family or partners or parents, and I categorized them into 6 different areas that IDEA requires that we have parent participation. There's a lot about the parents' rights in the IEP process. There's also the fact that parents need to be members of the state advisory panel for special education. The state and local performance plan, how the state and the local school district are going to implement special ed and how they're going to measure it, needs to include joint training with families, with parents. There's also a related service called Parent Counseling and Training, which we often hear at the early childhood stage, not so much as kids get older, but it is on the list of possible, optional, related service if the students need that. Monitoring includes parent input, so when the state comes in to monitor a district or the feds come in to monitor the state, what are parents' opinions? And that needs to be included. And then finally, there are parent training and information centers that are funded across the country. So these are the 6 areas that are mandated. So in some ways, we have to have family engagement because it's required by the law. But this isn't the same thing as partnership. Now, the Every Student Succeed Act, which replaced No Child Left Behind in 2015, added a part about parent and family engagement, but they only included it in the Title I, in the programs for students who meet the free and reduced lunch program, the schools that have a high poverty area. But there are all of these requirements for including parents, and it goes one step further than IDEA, but it's 9 years later. So we would hope that the research on family engagement will impact more and more with upcoming laws. Now, What probably will have the biggest impact is the Supreme Court decision last year in March of 2017. This case was the parents of Andrew F. filed a complaint in Douglas County for Douglas County Public Schools saying our child is in the 4th grade, he has autism, and he has not yet learned to read. He's had special ed services since preschool. So something is not happening here. Douglas County said, we've provided special ed services. There's been a special ed teacher available to him. The court's decision was de minimis, the minimum is not sufficient. That any time you provide educational supports through special education, there must be a measurable educational benefit for that student. It says that the appropriate progress is going to be determined individually in that student's IEP, since every student is different, and the IEP stands for Individualized Education Plan. But they have to ask the question, is this IEP reasonably calculated to enable the child to make appropriate progress? Are there strategies in there that will enable the child to make appropriate progress? And the parents have to be involved in a meaningful way, both in the IEP development and in progress monitoring. So I think down the road there are going to be a lot of changes in monitoring and expectations and the implementation of special education services. So these are the legal, mandated requirements that come from government offices. But what other reasons? There's been a lot of research about parent involvement. In the general ed population, a lot of research has come up with benefits that have been documented over more than 30 years. More consistent attendance, improved homework completion, greater time spent on homework, improved in-school behavior if the families are involved, improved academic performance, and higher school completion rate. So what about students with disabilities? Well, in addition to the academic achievement, parent involvement also has been linked to more positive post-school outcomes for youth with disabilities. They're more likely to be involved with post-school employment, post-secondary education, and to develop self-determination if we can get those families partnering with us. So how do we go about doing that? That's the question. Untapped, the National Technical Assistance Center for Transition, also did a literature review of specifically the literature related to secondary transition, and they're very skimpy research here. Only if students had one or both parents in the IEP meeting when they're in the 11th or 12th grade level, they were more likely to have post-school employment. And the second study is students with parents who had high expectations were more likely to be engaged in post-secondary education and employment. So high expectations for the families is linked to higher outcomes. There are very few studies beyond these two, so I want to do something about that. And so I'm launching something to generate more research, as you will hear at the end of this webinar. Now, the most exciting study for me was published in 1996 by Mary Morningstar and the Turnbulls. they conducted 3 focus groups of youth across different disabilities, 3 different locations, and they asked them about the transition activities that they had had to prepare them for their transition into adulthood. What have you had? And the students said, well, we've had job shadowing, we had career assessments, we had a chance to go out and talk to employers, we had a chance to tour job sites, we had a chance to have internships. They had all of these different experiences they had. And, they're checking off, yay, we had this, they had practice interviews. And then they said to the students, so what do you think about those? Were those valuable? And the students divided into 2 groups, regardless of where they were or what they had participated in. About half of them said those activities were meaningless, and about half said they're valuable. Now, the researchers were puzzled by this, and they said, well, what's the difference? You all had the same activities. How come half of you think if they're meaningless? How come half think they're valuable? And so they went on to probe a little deeper. And it turned out if the family said those activities are really valuable, we're so glad the school is doing that to help you prepare for your post-school life, then the kids embraced it, endorsed it, and got as much as they could out of it. On the other hand, if the family said, I can't believe the school is doing that kind of activity, that's meaningless, you should be working on your reading skills, you'll have the rest of your life to work, they shouldn't be working on that right now, those students did not buy in, did not find the activities meaningful. And so it makes me wonder, how many activities are we offering that the students may or may not be buying in terms of the value for their own post-secondary life, if we don't have the parents endorsing it? So there's an important challenge for us as we're moving on. So, mentioning the word challenge, what are the challenges to family participation? So we've got legal mandates that we have to involve families and involve parents in all kinds of ways. We have lots of evidence that families are an important partner in helping raise their child. I mean, they're the ones raising their child. We only have them for a little time each day. And then we have research evidence. So if this is all true, how come we don't have strong partnerships everywhere? I think there are some challenges. So this would be a time that I would invite you on that first little bubble reflection to jot down, who are the problem parents where you work? How would you describe them? Put down a word or two. What is it that they do or don't do? What makes them a problem parent for you? So you must have had some in mind that you logged on to watching this webinar. Who are they? Now, when I did the webinar, I paused for a minute. I'm going to keep going just so that this is a shortened version. Here are the things that people said. The families are demanding. They come in here and tell us, this is how you should take care of my child. This is what we need to do. They're going to come in and tell us how to run our school and run our programs. Or they're unreasonable. They either don't realize how much their child can do, or they think that their child can do a whole lot more than he or she can. So how do we, so we have parents that don't have reasonable expectations. And then we have a whole group of them that are uninvolved. They don't show up. They don't respond to our messages. They don't come to the IEP meetings. They don't come to the transition fairs or other activities that we have. Maybe it's because they're non-English speakers, and that could be one reason that there are problems for us. But maybe there are other reasons that they don't show up. So what can we do about it? Well, there are a number of frameworks that have come out over the years, and I'm going to run through them really quickly, and then I think we want to zero in on something that's more useful. First of all, in 1995, Joyce Epstein at Johns Hopkins came out with the theory of overlapping spheres of influence. She said the school, the family, and the community all have influence over the student, and that we need to all work together. And she developed the National Network of Partnership Schools that is coordinated out of Johns Hopkins, that has developed a whole series of activities and structures, schools that belong to the network, conduct their activities and then provide research back to Hopkins. A lot of the research from Hopkins went into the development of the first national PTA standards. Those standards were recently revised, and these are the 6 standards that they use now. So PTAs have a whole packet of information that they can use to work between schools and parents, professionals and parents, to build a strong partnership. And you notice they are using the word partnership, where they're welcoming all families into the school community, communicating a two-way street communication, making sure that their activities support student success, that they encourage the teachers and the families to speak up for every child, that they share decision-making power, and that they collaborate with other community organizations that could either support the school, support the family, support the child, bringing all of that together. So these are the national PTA standards for family-school partnerships, and they're being used in a number of schools quite successfully. The taxonomy for transition programming has recently been revised 2.0, and you see that family involvement is still one of the 5 cornerstones for the taxonomy. Family involvement, family empowerment, and family preparation. So if you're going to have a strong transition practice, a strong transition program, family involvement needs to be a part of it. A number of states have invited me to come and do workshops or breakout sessions at their conferences on family involvement, and people come away saying that those are great ideas. Sometimes I'm presenting with Donna Wandry, my co-author and editor, the 5 roles that parents play. The book on the left, Engaging and Empowering Families in Secondary Transition, is considered one of CEC's top sellers. All the royalties go back to the professional organization. But we have written that there are 5 roles families can play, and so what can professionals do to help families enter into those roles. But I think these books and these frameworks are part 2 of building strong partnerships. I think we've missed part 1, and I'm going to be coming back to that. But first I want to give you a personal example. So here's a typical IEP meeting. For years I sat at one as a special educator, or as the special ed team leader running the IEP meeting, or as the transition coordinator. And then I came one year as the parent. And they said when I was there as a professional, I could sit in whatever seat I wanted. But when I came as the parent, they said, "Oh, Miss Pleet, here's where we have our parents sit." There was an assigned seat for me to sit at this IEP meeting. Everybody else came with their stack of folders. I came with a piece of notepaper. What are they going to tell me about my son? This was a very interesting experience. Now, this happened over a course of a couple of schools, but I want to tell you about School A and School B, where I was the parent. In School A, the IEP team was ready to begin, and I noticed that the psychologist and the guidance counselor were not there, and they said, "Oh no, they're down the hall finishing another meeting. They'll be here in a few minutes. So why don't we go ahead and get started?" In fact, Miss Pleet, now I had been Amy to them at these IEP meetings up until now when I was there as a professional, but being a parent, they called me Mrs. Pleet. "Now, Mrs. Pleet, we have the part of the IEP meeting where we need to write down your concerns. Would you like to write your concerns?" So I said, "Okay, my concern is that my son has, we're considering him as being on the autism spectrum. He has some social emotional issues. I would like to have the guidance counselor and the psychologist here." I could feel what was going on with everybody in the room. It had happened to me plenty of times as the professional. Oh my gosh, what is she asking? If she wants us to delay until those 2 professionals can join the meeting, that means our meeting is going to be late. That means that teacher who has somebody covering her class, that person will have to go and teach their own class they're covering for right now, and this is going to throw off the schedule. This teacher is on lunch break, but in 15-20 minutes, a class is going to be coming into her room. I know what they're all thinking because I've been in those seats. But as a parent, I had to make a decision. Am I the team player saying, oh, I know how hard it is, I know what the schedule's like, we need to just move on? Or was I going to say, no, I'm here as the parent. And in order to get the right kind of thinking around this table, we need to have all the players, especially the guidance counselor and the psychologist. So I got the courage to say, I'd rather wait until they get here. And I saw people shaking their heads, not meeting my eyes. And I thought, whoa, what is happening? They were not happy with me. When we got into writing the IEP goals, and they had them all printed out ready for me to sign, and I said, wait a minute, you have an IEP goal here for reading, but my son's already reading on the 12th grade level in the 7th grade. I don't think we need a goal for reading. I think we need a goal for social emotional. And they went, oh, well, we don't know how to write one of those. Would you like to write it? And I thought, wow, most parents don't know how to write an IEP goal. I did, but they're going to totally defer to me. And then they also said, do you mean, but this is already printed out. Are you asking us to go back to the computer and do it over? And I thought, well, isn't this a draft? Them feeling at that meeting like they were the team, I was the outsider who was challenging them. This was not a partnership. And as I started to say a few minutes ago, if there was ever a time that they were out of compliance with a timeline, they were in danger of me filing a lawsuit against them, a complaint. Now, let me talk about School B. They took the time to listen. They asked me, how are things going from home? What's happening right now? We notice he came into school upset this morning. What's happening? The guidance counselor would be on the phone to me. I knew that they cared about my son and that they understood the total family picture. There was regular communication. The good news was shared as well as the bad news. They asked my perspective. When we were sitting down to the IEP meeting, we had already had some drafts of the goals going back and forth. In that school, if they were out of compliance with the timeline, I wasn't going to file a complaint. I knew they cared about my son. What's a few days? What's even a week or two? That's no big deal to me. If we build partnerships where the families feel like they are truly partners and that we are caring about their child, then a lot of the lawsuits that have happened will dissolve. Just my prediction. So I took a look at all of these frameworks that have been developed for building partnerships with families. And I thought, what is it that we need to do in secondary transition to really move this partnership idea forward? I came up with this organizer. Family partnerships need 3 things. We need to build a culture that's welcoming, trusting, and respectful of parents and having the parents respectful of us, where we're welcoming their perspectives and we understand their background. We need to have outreach because the families are not going to reach out to us. By the time these youth are at secondary transition stage, they've either had good experiences or not good experiences in schools. We need to reach out to them. We need to inform them, but the reaching out needs to be reciprocal, where we're asking for their input, asking for their prior experiences. And it needs to be multimodal so that it can be video, audio, phone call, in person, home visit, whatever kind of a combination. And the third part that we need is empowerment. How do we empower those families to empower themselves? How do we encourage them to be the best parent they could be and know that we've got their back? How can we help them empower their youth and have us join together in that? And then how can we use those parents to empower our whole system so we can use their input to improve? So for the purpose of this webinar, I boiled it down to 2 principles to make it really simple. The first is create a welcoming culture. So what do we mean by that? Ann Henderson and Karen Mapp wrote a book in 2007 called Beyond the Bake Sale. They talk about 4 levels of welcoming schools. The fortress school that says, sorry, doors are locked, you're really not welcome here unless it's PTA night that one night. There's a come if you call school where, oh yes, we have parents, we invite them to come on this committee. We invite them to come for this. We invite them to come for this event. And so the families respond to when they are called. We have an open door school. Oh yes, we have lots of families. We have a parent center where they can sit and work. We've invited them to come where we, the schools, have defined what their role is. And finally, a partnership where we and the parents together are defining their roles and defining our roles, where we're playing it together. Now, within the special ed world, Mary Brunell and a group of people wrote a very good article. You see the reference at the bottom of the page. And she says being welcoming has two parts to it. First is to build rapport. In order to build rapport, that school improvement team members have to recognize their own misconceptions and stereotypes they hold about families. Their negative views of families will be the first barrier to any type of productive relationship. What is it we believe about those families? I recently wrote a blog about finger pointing. Is it those families? They do this. If only they were different. If only they, but what do we know about them? Are they all the same? Is it people in that neighborhood, people who look like that? Maybe if we walked in their shoes a little bit, we would know a little more about them. And we have to recognize what stereotypes we have. Oh, that parent is coming. That kind of response is going to immediately be a barrier to partnership. And the second recommendation she had is to gather information from the family members, and the school improvement team will have to establish quality interactions with families to listen to families. What goals and concerns do they have about their child? What information, how can we communicate information about their children in clear and respectful ways? How can we effectively engage in problem solving? If they have negative feelings about school from prior experiences, we need to know what those are and say, I'm sorry that that has happened to you. Let's take it from here. We won't treat you that way. That is a way to help heal. So we have to identify what our misconceptions, prior experiences, stereotyped ideas are, and what families are. Those two steps will create a welcoming culture. I've also come up with a whole list of tips, creating a welcoming culture. Listen, 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 both sides. Anticipating that families probably had prior negative experiences. And when they treat you a certain way, don't take it personally. They just see you as being like the teachers that they've worked with before, or the transition coordinators that they've worked before, or those other professionals that back in the 5th grade told them something. So identify your own prior judgments and prejudices. Make the least dangerous assumption. Let's assume that the families really care and that the families are doing the best they can. Value all of the contributions that the families make. Interesting that you say that. Why do you say that? What's happened before? What can you tell us about that? And then organize some kind of special outreach for less engaged families. How do we get those families that have not been working with us? How do we reach out to them? I love the story of Michelle Brooks riding an ice cream truck around the neighborhoods and talking to the families that came up to the ice cream truck. Schedule events, different times and places. It may mean you have to work in an evening or you work on a Saturday to go out and find out what's happening with those families that you want to reach. Develop cultural competence. If you have families that have different cultures, use community allies. What other sites can be valuable go-betweens to help bridge the gap? Kansas has a great list of 50 ideas to boost family, school, community partnerships on their website. And I'm going to tell you at the end where a whole lot of these resources that I mentioned can be found. So, second opportunity for you to do some reflection in that little bubble. How are you doing with making your school, your IEP meeting, your transition meeting, transition fair, how are you doing with making it a welcoming situation, a welcoming culture? When the parents are greeted at the front door of the school, are they welcomed? And what else could you do? I gave more time when I was doing the webinar, but I'm going to keep going. Second principle, collaborate with families as partners to strengthen youth efficacy. Now there's a lot in that statement, and I'm going to break the word apart into 3 definitions. First of all, collaborate. I love that it can be broken down into the prefix and the root word. Co means together, labor means working. So collaborate means working together for common goals. Are we working with families together on common goals? It's pretty simple when you think of it that way. And what about a partnership? It's a relationship resembling a legal partnership involving close cooperation between parties having specified and joint rights and responsibilities. So what does that mean? If you and I were forming a business partnership, we wouldn't want to have identical skills. I know how to make these cute little craft things, and you know how to market, or you know how to get the funding for it. So we come together because we have 2 different kinds of expertise. Now, I need to explain to you this little craft thing that I'm doing so that you know the vocabulary, you know what I'm doing, and you need to give me some information about marketing and the finances so that I have some information about that. But we basically trust each other to do our roles. We have 2 different jobs. We have to keep communicating and trusting each other in order to build that partnership. That's what we're talking about with families. There was a great article a few years ago called, Are We Professionalizing Parents? Do we want parents to know everything a special ed teacher knows in order to be a good parent? No, they're the parent. They have important parent roles. They need to know some things about what we do so that they can reinforce and provide their support. And we need to know some of what they're dealing with so that it goes both ways. And then the third word is efficacy, to have the power for a positive effect, the power to have a positive effect. So as we're working in partnership, collaborating in partnership, professionals and families, we're going to build the efficacy of youth together so that these young people, when they graduate, will be prepared. So let's take a little deeper look at that. The U.S. Department of Education in 2014 came out with something they called it was a new parent and community engagement framework. It was called the Dual Capacity Building Framework. And we could go into a lot of detail. I think you may want to look online at what this includes. There's a whole packet of information that came along with it that you can download. But it basically says we want the capacity of professionals and families to be built in order to have a partnership. What do we need? What capacity do the professionals need to partner with families? And what capacity do the families need in order to partner with professionals? And that's what this framework was talking about. Now, coming with a secondary transition background, I thought it should be tri-capacity. How do we build the professional capacity of professionals and families and youth? But maybe what we're talking about is having the partnership of professionals and families together to build the capacity of youth as a partnership. So I woke up one morning a couple months ago and I had this brainstorm. Don't you love it when that happens? And I thought I should draw out a matrix. And I called my web designer who does cartooning and asked him to help me with this. Now picture this matrix. Professional capacity across the top. And I know it's a whole continuum, but let's just say it's yes or no. The professionals do have the capacity to work with families or they don't. And down the left side, family capacity. Either the families do or don't have the capacity to work with professionals. And then of course there's all the continuum in between. But for now, let's make it simple. So looking down in the bottom left corner, if there's no professional capacity, in other words, those professionals have no idea how to reach out to families or listen to families or anything, and families have no way of talking to professionals. There's like they're butting heads. Then what I would say is this is distrustful islands. In this case, the families and the professionals don't talk to each other unless they're pointing the finger of blame back and forth. And you see that child sinking in the middle. So here's an example. Teachers used to call me and say, "Hello, Mrs. Pleet, your son is not getting along with the other students. Can you please talk to him?" So here's an example of somehow I, the parent, would have the capacity of fixing my son. Well, he's on the autism spectrum, so getting along with other kids is part of the characteristic of that. So how did they think that a phone call to me and would solve the problem? So sure, I'll talk to him tonight, and tomorrow I'm sure everything will be fine. There's an example of this did not build partnership between me and the teachers. They thought, we can't fix it, you fix it. So the finger was pointing the other way. Lots of blame game. The teachers say things like the families don't care about their kids' education, and the families say things like the professionals don't understand us or our kids, and we've never trusted teachers anyway. Finger pointing, victim, feeling like all alone, overwhelmed, kind of righteous about their own point of view, but it's very isolating and solitary. Whatever, it's not my fault, it's because of them. Everything that happens in this quadrant is focused on the problem. People admire the problem, they wish the other group would fix the problem, repair. It's like a, can you get your repair shop working? And we expect a quick answer. So that's the first quadrant. Here's another example that shows you how this is. I found this letter to the editor that's, as a retired teacher, I'm sick of people who know nothing about public schools or have not been in a classroom recently deciding how to fix our education system. The teachers are not the problem, the parents are the problem. And it goes on. I would love to find an article about saying that the teachers are the problem. I'm sure there are plenty out there as well. So let's look in the next quadrant. If you have the capacity of families, so someone has really informed these families, the parent-teacher center, an attorney's office, support groups that exist related to disability, the families have gotten the capacity to ask for what they want, but the professionals don't know how to meet them. So in this corner, we have a demanding consumer. So you see in the cartoon this mom with her little kid slung over her back, demanding, shouting, and the poor professional sitting there doesn't know how to handle it. Now, I have a story related to this too. When I was teaching a graduate course on building partnerships with families, one of the teachers in my course wanted to do a workshop for all the families of students with disabilities in her school, and she went to the principal to ask for permission. Can I do it Wednesday after school and Wednesday evening? And the principal said to her, "You are not doing that in my building. An informed parent is a dangerous parent." She was shocked. I was shocked. But then I got thinking, wow, that's a prevalent concern. And in this quadrant, that is what happens. An informed parent is a dangerous parent because we don't know what to do with them. Parents know more is possible. They demand better services. They're frustrated that the school personnel hasn't fixed it. They demand that things get fixed. And schools come up with this, I don't like this phrase, but we don't have to provide a Cadillac when a Chevy will do. So we have increased lawsuits here, lots of complaints being filed. So let's look at this third one, where you have the capacity of professionals. We know how to talk to parents. We know how to notice it's a one-way street. We know how to talk to parents. We know how to manage the situation, but they have insider authority, and the families, I don't know anything about transition. I don't know anything about special ed. Whatever you tell me, it must be right because you are the authority. So I recall one time when I was sitting in an IEP meeting and I was advocating for something that my daughter needed, and the school said, well, we really don't usually do that. They looked at all the evidence and they said, yes, I guess in this case, she would be a good candidate for that program. And the guidance counselor came up to me and said, I resent that you used insider knowledge to get something for your daughter that most parents don't even know exists. once again, my feelings were immediately hurt. You know, how rude that she would say that to me. But then I thought, how brilliant. Insider knowledge. Wow, we do have insider knowledge. How many times had I said to a parent, don't tell them I told you, but you can ask for blah, 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 whatever it was. How many times have professionals said that to a family? It's insider knowledge. We're not supposed to tell you. Why wouldn't we tell parents what's available? For some parents, it's not appropriate. It's not what they need. But why wouldn't we tell them it's available? Why is there insider knowledge? I know that there are funding issues. I know we can't provide amazing programs to meet every need of every student. But when there are programs available, why wouldn't we let folks know? It's like we are the sage on the stage. I'm the professional. I have the guidebook. I have the answers. I have the procedures. I have the protocol. I have the control. Trust me, I'm the expert. Many professionals complain that parents don't contribute more, but they haven't given parents the opportunities to contribute. And so this is what we have. So finally, we're in the fourth quadrant. Let's figure this out together. We don't have all the answers. I, the parent, don't have all the answers. I, the professional, don't have all the answers. Let's get together. We don't have to act like we know it all. Let's figure this out together. Let's combine what you know about your child, what I know about programs, and let's figure this out. Let's keep the questions open. This is a grand experiment. We're going to collaboratively problem solve and try this. And if it doesn't work, we're going to get back together without pointing the finger of blame and say, okay, we tried that. What do we need to tweak to make it work? It values relationships. It values brainstorming. It values creative solutions. It acknowledges that each person is bringing the best they have to offer. Information flows freely back and forth. Do you know about this? Let's consider this. Both are vulnerable and forgiving. They both accept and they make generous assumptions about each other. I believe you're doing the best you know how for your child. And professionals, I believe you're doing the best you know how for my child. When you have that, you will have very few lawsuits and very few complaints filed because everybody is working together. Will this take more time? In the beginning, yes. It will take more time, especially for professionals that aren't comfortable, especially for families that don't trust, that have not had good experiences in the past. So we're going to have a gradual process of opening up and breaking through. So here are the tips for collaborating with families as partners. Assume that we are working on common goals. We're not adversaries. Align with the parent training information centers to what they're providing to families. Make sure that the schools are involved so that it's not just giving the information to the families. Share decision-making and power and agree on appropriate roles. How about if I handle this, you handle that? Respect the parent's expertise with their child. And with other things, these parents could have expertise that could help the school in other ways. Regularly share updates, not just the paper that goes home quarterly, but updates on what's happening. And that goes both ways. Have the families, the parents updating the school updating the families. Involve families in the homework assignments. That doesn't mean have the parents do it. Doesn't mean have the parents monitor it. But there's some great activities that come out of the work at Johns Hopkins on home-involved homework assignments. And then make sure the family's voice is heard in the IEP process, being responsive to family ideas. So we take a moment for you to jot down your thoughts on reflection number 3. How are you doing with collaborating as partners to build youth efficacy? Are you listening? Are there aligned goals? Do you share the power? What could you do? So whatever thoughts come to you, that would belong in reflection number 3. So now I have an invitation for you. As I've done these workshops, day-long workshops or hour-long breakout sessions, worked with school districts across the country, I have found a common issue. At the end of the workshop, I've heard this was really informative. This gave us a lot of great ideas. And then when I get back in touch with them later, what have you done? Well, we have it on our plan to start next year. So I got thinking about what it is that they need. They need something to get started, and it needs to be in incremental chunks. So I am starting something I'm calling my Family Partnership Cadre. It's going to start in January of 2019. If it's successful, I'll run others, but the first one is starting in January of 2019. This will be an online support for a cadre of transition teams. So if you are part of a secondary transition team, then what you want to do is talk to the other people on your team, a transition coordinator, somebody from an adult agency, VR or DE services or mental health services, stakeholders from the schools who would be part of the transition team, might be the psychologist or a special educator, a team leader or a district supervisor. Consider including a family member, maybe somebody from the parent center on your team. Consider including a youth with disabilities on your team. And I'm leaving the membership of your team up to you, but each team would be 4 to 7 people. We can work it out if you need to include more than that. But the transition team would come together and say, we're committed to expanding the effectiveness of partnerships with families in our area. And we want to do it from January to December of 2019. So I'm going to set up a year-long cadre. This will be a combination of book study, online webinars where we'll be swapping ideas using Zoom. And then each group will have a locally designed project to support systems change in their area. Some kind of an action plan that will be using implementation science, evaluation, and data analysis. Don't worry if you don't know what that means, you will. But the focus would be to either create a welcoming culture in your area, maybe the way you're doing IEP meetings for students who are doing transition, maybe it's your transition fair, maybe it's college fairs, some event that you're doing where the focus is to collaborate with families as partners to strengthen youth efficacy. So here's how it's going to roll out. Phase 1 would be from January to June, where each team would be doing a climate assessment, and we have some tools that you'd be looking at, or you could design your own. What are the hidden assumptions, judgments, and beliefs that you hold or families hold that are interfering with this partnership? So you'd be doing some data gathering. You'd be looking at leadership roles. All of us have an opportunity to be a leader at some point in our life. How can we help the families emerge as leaders? How can we help the professionals emerge as leaders? How can we empower the leadership of each other and help the youth emerge as leaders? We'll be looking at trust. We'll be looking at empowerment and the science of trust and empowerment. And then we'll be evaluating current practices and activities. That will all occur from January till June with a book each month. And then for each person on the team. And then phase 2 is where they will begin at the end of June. We'll start talking about setting up an action research project where they will say, all right, here's our baseline. This is the area that we want to address, picking just one area. Here are our progress data now. And then here's our action plan and our timeline. This is what we want to do to move forward towards partnership. We're going to be looking at interpersonal effectiveness. We'll be looking at slight edge actions. You'll know what that means. And then by December, we'll start talking about sustainability. We'll mention it here and there throughout, but each team will be looking at what lessons have we learned over the course of this year, what data have we gathered that we've analyzed, and what steps would be next for us. We will be on a once-a-month phone call, except not in the summer, where all of the teams will get together and share with each other what they're learning. My goal is that this would not only produce effective change in your local area in one small way that could then be replicated, but the cross-pollination will be valuable for everyone. And remember where I said there is very little research? If you want to include a university scholar on your team somebody who would love to do some research and get publications, which they're always looking for, then that person would certainly be welcome on the team as well. And then we could have a number of publications about what does it take to make partnerships with families. So feel free to contact me if you want more information about being part of the cadre. Everyone who was on this webinar, I emailed a flyer that what the requirements are and the, all the logistics that go along with that. So let me share with you a couple of resources. My website, if you haven't discovered it by now, is amypleet.com, and I have on there 5 Google documents that I started collecting about 10 years ago. Each one is a list of really cool resources that I found at a national conference, or I was on a webinar, or I was reading and I found out about this, or I discovered another website or whatever. So one of them is my favorite family and community engagement resources. And you'll see that for each one there's a little screenshot, there's the title of it, a little description, and then a link. So you can just scroll down and you see that little green box is the subcategories. One of them is my favorite family and community engagement resources, my favorite inclusion, my favorite school transformation. There's one on technology, and there's one on secondary transition. So there are a number of resources that I've gathered. If you have something great that's not on my list, send it to me. I'm updating this all the time. So as I'm winding down, here is my contact information. Feel free to contact me if you have questions about the cadre, or if there's some other support that I can offer to you, your school district, or the families that you work with. Thank you so much for tuning in. I look forward to hearing from you. Let's all build stronger partnerships with families. Bye.